Hello and welcome to Intro to Psychology 2. We're going to look at personality theory and how we assess personality. And in the first video here, what I'm going to do here is look at more at some of the history of looking at personality. So first we're going to define it. And then we're going to look at some of the theories that have been emerging from the past and how they've started looking at and considering what is personality. And then we'll move into part 2 where we'll look at a little bit more of the current perspective and look at assessments as well. So if you've ever wondered about your own personality and what is it and how do we get it, aren't we born with a personality? I'm hoping that through this video you'll get some sense about where it is or how it is and where it comes from. So good luck with this one, and I hope it's all been going well for you this semester, and welcome back after the break.
Okay, we're going to start by looking at a definition of personality. And when we look at the definition, personality is a pattern of enduring, distinctive thoughts, emotions, behaviors that characterize the way the individual adapts to the world. So it's unique to you. Enduring and stable patterns are basically the same. Enduring meaning it's stable over a long period of time. Now, distinctive thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, this is all about characteristics, that things that you could describe yourself as. So the person's unique and stable pattern of characteristics and behavior. Now, it doesn't mean nothing changes over time. It just means it's very slow if it does change, or very little change. It just maybe even matures as a personality characteristic. Now, what we're going to look at, as mentioned, was some of the earlier theorists that influenced the direction that later theorists went in terms of trying to describe what is personality. And the psychoanalysis perspective, which was pioneered by Sigmund Freud, they view personality as primarily unconscious, that it's beyond your awareness and as occurring in stages. So one, it's unconscious. You don't think about performing and putting out characteristics that would be described as your personality. They just seem to occur beneath the conscious level of awareness. And they occur in stages, is that over time they can evolve or stage develop into more mature personality traits. Most psychoanalytic perspectives emphasize that the early experiences with your parents play an important role in sculpting personality. So the three primary elements of what is introduced by the psychoanalysis perspective is personality is primarily unconscious, it develops in stages, and early experiences are the most important in regards to where our personalities come from. Now, Freud's conception of personality introduced what he was like an iceberg of sorts, and it was described in three parts. And in this, there were three sort of levels of consciousness. And we'll start with the parts. The id, which is the unconscious system of the personality, which contains the life and death instinct and operates on the pleasure principle. It's the source of the libido. If you will, the id is all the thoughts, ideas, creativity, and the goods and the bads of who we are without any filter. It's in the id. The ego is the logical, rational, and largely conscious system of personality which operates according to the reality principle. So it's the part that most people see. The see of you. It's the way that you behave around people in real time at a conscious level. That's your logical, rational self. And then the third part is that of the superego. Now, this is something that's partially seen by others, but is often below the surface, if you will. This is the moral system of personality, which consists of the conscious and the ego ideal. Now, that means that when you violate any of the rules that the superego produces, we often feel an emotional guilt or shame in the id. That's just meaning that if we set a rule that says this is how you treat people, and if we break that rule, we have some degree of shame associated with that, because the ego is what sort of sets the condition by which we live our lives. The ego is the living of our lives. The id is all that within That is our potential, if you will. So when we obey these sort of social constructs, the superego, it produces a pleasant and emotional pride. So if you strive to achieve certain goals in your life that meet a moral standard, and you get a certain positive boost out of that. Now, the 3 levels of consciousness began with the conscious level, which contains all the thoughts and the feelings and sensations and the memories of which the person, you, in this case, is aware of any given moment. So if you were to sit down and write everything that's on your mind as it comes to your mind, that's what's called a stream of consciousness. But it's basically a note, a writing that you've done of everything that you're conscious of at that moment. But that doesn't include everything that you know, only what you're conscious of at that time. The pre-conscious, from Freud's perspective, this includes the thoughts and feelings and memories that you have that you're not consciously aware of, but you could be asked to bring it to consciousness if I asked you a question like, what's your mom and dad's first name? It probably isn't in that stuff that you wrote down in your conscious level, but if I asked you what that was, you could pull that up, and that would be your pre-conscious. The unconscious is the primary motivating force of human behavior. It contains repressed memories as well as instincts, wishes, desires that have never been conscious, and this is why he links that to the id. Now, what you're seeing here is a sample of some defense mechanisms. Now, defense mechanisms are used by the ego to defend against any anxiety or is used to maintain your self-esteem. Defense mechanisms are especially important when the ego is forced to choose to violate any of these superego rules. Now, one of the things to be aware of is that all people use defense mechanisms to some degree, and if you overuse this can adversely affect one's mental health. So, for example, you see repression there, and it's an involuntary removal of unpleasant memory, thought, or perception from the conscious. And so, for example, if Jill forgets a traumatic experience from childhood, this would protect her from a lot of anxiety and enable her to maintain her self-defense. But if one uses and overly uses repression on a lot of different other elements, then that would certainly have some effect on our mental health. And so this is something that Freud contributed that has had some staying power, if you will. It's still being used. Now, what you're seeing here now is Freud's psychosexual stages of development. Now, I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on this. You can find this in your textbook. But this is what he would say was a series of stages through which the sexual instinct develops, and each stage is defined by an erogenous zone in which there's conflict that arises: the oral stage, the anal stage, the phallic stage, the latency phase, and the genital stage. And this is where his theory around stages come through this. And it's based on, if you will, the success or the failure, the conflict that arises, and whether or not we resolve the conflict at each of these stages. And that what can happen is a potential fixation or arrested development at a particular stage based on either getting a lot of satisfaction from that stage or having a lot of frustration from that stage. And so potentially could cause some personality trait development and characteristics. Now, Freud wasn't the only person who did some early work in the area of personality. One of his students, that of Carl Jung, he also pursued some work in this area, but he differed from Freud in that he didn't think that sexual instincts was the main factor in personality development, or that it was completely formed in childhood. He considered that middle age to be an important part of personality development. He also didn't agree with Freud in regards to the structure of personality. Instead, he looked at the ego as the part of the personality that carries out the day-to-day activities, and it's of secondary importance to the unconscious. Now, the personal unconscious is our uniquenesses. This contains both our past, it also represents our memories, our wishes, desires, and experiences accessible to the conscious. So the personal conscious is all that history that you have, and all of that can be retrieved very easily, but it's also very unique to you. Now, what he described as being shared by all people is what he called the collective unconscious. And this is his term for the impersonal, deepest layer of the unconscious mind that's shared by all human beings because of our common ancestral past. And he would describe archetypes. This was a name that he gave to the emotionally laden ideas and images in this collective unconscious. And they have rich symbolic meaning. So the fear of the dark, the belief in gods and evil spirits, he would call these archetypes as being a part of, personality development. Now you can see in these early stages, they're fairly rudimentary in terms of blocking out personality into areas, types. And it's not the only way in which it was evolving. Alfred Adler, he introduced and emphasized the unity of personality rather than the sort of separate warring compartments between id, ego, and superego, or the ego and the personal unconscious and collective unconscious, these sort of competing parts. He saw this as being a unified, that personality was unity and unified. There was a drive to overcome inferiority that was acquired through childhood motives for most behaviors. So, because we were unskilled and not as good as those adults around, there was an awful lot of that was motivating children to be overcoming this inferiority, and it motivated most behavior. People develop a unique style of life, he called it, at an early age, and that is used throughout life to achieve superiority. So if you were a child that stayed focused on a task a long time and really worked hard to sort of figure it out, that was a perseverance that likely carried through to your adulthood, where if something challenged you and you tried for a while and it wasn't being very successful and you gave up and moved on to something else, that too may have been a style of life that's carried on through adult life. Now he looked at the conscious and saying that we can perceive the future. This is what we do with our consciousness. We can perceive the future and we can affect our own future goals. Thus, when he was saying that we could work throughout our life to achieve superiority, that we could see to the future what we would want and aim to set future goals. Now he described the inferiority complex as being an inferior feeling so strong that it could even prevent personal development. That if we've really felt that strongly about our inferiority, then that could really affect our potential development and our personal development. Now Karen Horney, she was a Canadian, and she didn't agree with Freud except for the significance of childhood experience. She saw that as important. Now the basic attitude towards life is something that she focused on, and this is, do you see you move toward life? Do you move against items or away from people? So this attitude about life, are you moving toward, against, or away? And however she saw personality developing over in one's life, she saw it as a continuous process over one's life. Her work centered on two main themes, that about neurotic personality and feminine psychology, and believed that men and women, to be psychologically healthy, had to learn to overcome the irrational belief about the need for perfection. And so her two main theories, or two main themes, neurotic personality, she didn't accept the id, the ego, and the superego, or the sexual instinct and the psychosexual stages. She stressed the importance of early childhood experiences, the cultural influences, and environmental influences on personality. So neurotics were frequently trapped in a vicious cycle in which their compulsive need to reduce basic anxieties led to a variety of self-defeating behaviors. These behaviors then produced more anxiety, and that continued the cycle. So personality could continue to develop throughout life. And so this has been a more of a theme that seems to start to emerge in these early theories, is that your personality can continue to develop throughout your lifetime. Now her work in feminine psychology was really about, that many women in psychological difficulties arise from a failure to live up to this idealized version of who women are supposed to be, and that overcoming the irrational beliefs about this need for perfection required for the psychological health for both men and women influence on the modern cognitive behavior therapies. And so this sort of unrealistic expectation of how we're supposed to be is one of the influences towards issues that we have as personality challenges. So what we'll do in the next video is look more at more current theories on personality. And what you really could take away from this is that personality theory really hasn't nailed down what is personality. These are different lenses looking at what personality is. And same with the personality assessments. We'll look at those in the next video as well. All right, thank you very much and good luck.